sticks.
I was going to ask
Shot
you, yeah, because I was going to ask you
five.
about the
Scene
storm,
one,
and I was
shot
going to ask you
five.
about working in the heat during the summer as well, and how.
Working in the heat?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good question.
Rolling now.
Rolling.
Shot 1, scene 8, take 1A.
Then, and now I can't remember what the question was.
Okay, if you would mind introducing yourself and explaining what your connection is to Sutton Hoo.
I'm Pauline Moore. I'm a guide at Sutton Hoo.
My name's Helen Geek, and I was an undergraduate at University College London in 1987 when Martin Carver came to give a talk on Sutton Hoo and asked if anybody would like to excavate there in the summer.
My name is Les Harvey, and I am the first site warden here for the National Trust at Sutton Hoo.
What were your first impressions of Sutton Hoo when you first saw it?
I came here long before the National Trust took over with my father-in-law, who was a friend of Basil Brown, the man who uncovered the great ship burial. And he brought us here with permission from the farmer who owned the property at the time, and we were allowed to go out onto the mounds, which was very exciting indeed.
What I was expecting was big mounds like Mound 2 now is a rebuilt one. So my first impression was, is that it?
How much did you know of Sutton Hoo and the history of Sutton Hoo before you went to the interview?
The experience I had of Sutton Hoo beforehand was through my sister-in-law who lives in Sweden. She knew the history, and through her I actually learnt more than I'd ever known before.
So, when did you come to Sutton Hoo, and what was the purpose of why you came here?
Well, I first came for 3 weeks in the summer of 1987. That's what I was contracted to do, if you like, because when Martin Carver had come to talk to us at my university, he'd said, if you stay for 3 weeks, you can excavate a body.
Can you give us an example of some of the work you've done while either a volunteer here or a member of the Sutton Hoo Society?
Yes. You're on duty in the hall sometimes, talking to visitors as they go around, answering any questions they have. The exhibition hall is full of replicas of the finds here. You can clear up plates in the cafe if you're so inclined.
What sort of duties were you tasked with doing?
Well, if you name it, I probably did it over the period of time and I still do it. I do the maintenance, so that includes the plumbing, small electrics, keeping things going, fixing things, mending things that get broken on a daily basis, security side, all sorts of things that you might find you're doing in your own house, only here it's on a bigger scale.
Martin's team had been digging here since 82, 83, 84, and 1985 and 1986 had seen the excavation of the Eastern Cemetery, which was a lot of enigmatic bodies, literally, not skeletons, bodies that had been preserved by the sandy conditions. And so his talk in 1987 was largely about that Eastern Cemetery, because it was the stunning, peculiar discovery that had caught everybody's imagination.
The only reason we know anything at all about the story of the man who's buried in the ship is because the Venerable Bede wrote down what he knew of this place. Bede is trying to collect information on how all the tribes of Britain England became Christian. And the story of Rodwald is very interesting and exciting. He helped King Edwin, Bede's king, to get the throne of Northumberland. He'd been escaping from a savage king called Ethelfrith all his life, and he came to ask for help, and Rodwald joined forces with Edwin. He won a great battle at the River Idle and put Edwin on the throne of Northumberland. Rodwell becomes High King over all the lesser kings of the Eastern Angles, and Bede tells us all this. He dies in 625 AD, and as you know, he's buried in the Great Mounds, which is a practice of Scandinavians. You see mounds in Denmark, Sweden, Norway. They bury their kings and queens on a mound, if possible near the sea or a river, often with ships. So it's definitely part of their history, and we are part of this great tradition.
I've obviously been in this area before because this is probably the nicest part. I'm a bit biased, but it's the nicest part of Suffolk. Because you're not far from the coast, you've got the trees, you've got the landscape, you've got the sandlings. So overall, the site here has got everything. You can see the water, you can see the trees, you can see the sandlings. So, to be honest, for me, it's like a paradise. The landscape here is one of those ones where you can see a little bit of everything. If you've got young children who want to run around screaming, shouting, kick the ball, you can do that. If you're more of a person who likes to wander off on their own or as a couple, you can wander off these little pathways in more secluded areas and just take in the sounds and sights of the animals and the birds. And if you like a bit of history, nothing better for a walk around the mountains, because there's not many places in this UK where you can actually go to a place and see everything in one little area like that.
All those years working at Sutton Hoo I had a lot of questions that couldn't be answered by the site. So I used to say things like, well, okay, you say Sutton Hoo is unusual, so what are all the other cemeteries like that are around at this time? And people would go, oh, well, we don't really know. And I think, well, that's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? Why doesn't somebody try and find out? So after I got my degree results, Martin said, well, why don't you come and do a PhD? And I ummed and I erred and I dithered and I took a year off, and in the end I decided that I would come and do the PhD at York. And the first year after I started, people would say, oh, what's your PhD on? Visiting dignitaries, people that knew a lot about the subject. And I'd say, oh, cemeteries of around the time of Sutton Hoo. And I remember one person saying, short thesis that will be. And of course it didn't turn out to be. And I did discover that Sutton Hoo was indeed even more unusual and unique and peculiar than we had ever thought.
I heard a potential story from one of your, I presume, former colleagues about you and taking care of an adopted lamb. Do you perhaps remember anything?
Yeah, we did look after a lamb. The one I'm more fond of is the fact that we had a tawny owl. Do you want to hear about that?
Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, as a lot of people will realise, owls can be very lovely but can be very cruel, because sometimes if they have their chicks late on in the year and the food starts to wane a little bit, the smallest of the ones born sometimes becomes potential food for the other two chicks. So we had a case where there's a lady who went for a walk early one morning here, and then came running back because she found this little chick at the bottom of a huge tree where we got an owl box. Now, this little chick was a little baby tawny owl, could be more than a week, maybe 10 days old, all covered in fluff, but also all covered in flies and stuff. Anyway, she was a bit concerned about it, so I went across and saw it. Yeah, I could see it. I had a friend of mine called Fred Bridges, who was a great naturalist, and he came across and we managed to get the bird to feed again from a little syringe that we had. Then later on today, we got the big ladder back up, went back up to the box, put it back in the box, left it overnight, so that it would all be rosy. Next morning, first thing about 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm back over again. There it was on the ground, even worse than it was the previous day, covered in flies. So we repeated the procedure, and that evening back up again, put the ladder up, put it back in the box. Following next morning, it was in a really sad state, and I realised then it had obviously been abandoned, or maybe the parents had taken the other chicks and flown on, and would potentially try and use it as food. So we decided at that moment it needed a bit more care, so we brought it home, up my jumper, Took it into my house where my wife was, and she fell in love with it. So initially we put it into a little cardboard box, which was great, to keep it warm, and we were feeding it overnight with little bits and pieces we had. I then contacted Hoseley Braid Prison, who have their own, not Hoseley Braid, Warring Hill Prison, who have their own raptor centre over there, and the guys are really skilled in birds of prey. One of the wardens came over with mice and chicks in hand, dead of course, and showed me how to feed it. And from then on, the box got too small, so we proceeded to a metal dog cage. That got too small. We then went to a Great Dane cage in our lounge. The Great Dane cage got too small, so then our whole lounge became an aviary. So the whole lounge was covered. It was a bit like a holiday sort of resort when everyone's putting their towels out. Everything was covered in towels and sheets and blankets all over the whole lounge. So Norma, we gave her as the name, because the lady who found her. She took over our lounge, and by this time she was starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and started to fly. My wife and I used to teach her how to catch things of an evening by bringing in beetles and worms to try and encourage her how to forage for herself. And then we built an aviary in the back garden, and the aviary was a big aviary. She loved it in the aviary. She was there for about a month, and eventually got time to see if she'd fledge. So she, a bit reluctant at first, she'd fly out and then fly back in again. And then eventually she went off on her own, and then used to come back in the evenings to be fed. So again, I was sat in the garden with an overgrown bird table, which she'd come in, take her food and fly off again. Several people from the trust used to come and watch her. And then in the autumn of that year, she disappeared, and we never saw her again for quite a period of time. 2 years later, I happened to be in the back garden one evening, and there was a little familiar tweet on the fence post, and there she was. I was a bit choked up there. Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Don't often do this, sorry. There she was with 3 of her young, all on the fence post, which meant more expense. I was feeding her 3 youngsters, which was probably cost me 20 quid a week, but it was brilliant. And this went on for a couple of years. Yeah, so I apologise for that. I'm sorry. It's like having kids with my uncle, man.
She was a big part.
She was.
She was a big part of
Yeah.
Sutton Who.
God, yeah, I don't often do that, do I? Yeah, a bit sport me image.